Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Sally Thurston from the Maynard Public Library, and we are delighted to have such a great crowd tonight. This is a special event for us. We are celebrating our town's 150th anniversary, as well as the library's 140th anniversary. And we are fortunate to have been in the former Roosevelt School in Maynard on Nason Street for 15 years. So we're celebrating that anniversary as well. In the honor of this occasion, we have invited the acclaimed author Kent Krueger to talk about his latest books, and he'll be joined in conversation with Halle Efron, who is one of our favorites. So I skipped part of my introduction. We want to acknowledge our wonderful friends group from the Friends of the Maynard Library. They do so much great work in support of our programming here, and including funding this event tonight. So thank you to everyone from the Friends. We really appreciate you. We would like to encourage anyone who's interested in purchasing a book that is spoken about tonight. Please consider buying from Porter Square Books. We'll be putting links to I think the three main books that we're talking about into the chat. So it will also be in the follow-up email. And before we get started in earnest, we would like to offer a land acknowledgement. This land that now constitutes the town of Maynard is part of the ancestral and traditional home of the Nipmuc peoples, who are here for thousands of years before the town was established. Let us take this opportunity to thank the original caretakers of the land who are not forgotten and whose descendants are still with us here in Massachusetts. I think that's important in the week of Indigenous Peoples Day. Okay, let's jump right into the introductions. William Kent Krueger is the New York Times bestselling author of This Tender Land and Ordinary Grace, which was the winner of the Edgar Award for Best Novel. He is also the creator of the Cork O'Connor mystery series set in the Northwoods of Minnesota, including 2021's Lightning Strike, which is a fantastic book I just finished. About This Tender Land, Booklist wrote, "More than a simple journey, it is a deeply satisfying odyssey, a quest in search of self and home. Richly imagined and exceptionally well plotted and written, it is most of all a compelling, often haunting story that will captivate both adult and young adult readers." And I can't imagine who wouldn't want to read the book after that. And to join Kent in conversation, we're also welcoming back to the library Halle Efron. Halle is a New York Times bestselling author, an Edgar Award finalist, a 5-time finalist for the Mary Higgins Clark Award, and a blogger with the fabulous Jungle Red Writers. I hope she talks about that tonight. She is the recipient of New England Crime Bake's 2019 Lifetime Achievement Award and was a crime fiction book reviewer for the Boston Globe for more than 10 years. Her latest book is a domestic suspense thriller, Careful What You Wish For, and I hope we hear more about that as well. Okay, I'm going to turn the camera and the mic over to Halle and Kent. Give me 1 second to switch over here. Oh, hang on. And this is always awkward.
Here I am.
And there's Kent. Take it away.
Well, first of all, we're both thrilled to be here, wherever here is, quote here. And I was so thrilled to be asked to be in conversation with Kent, who is just a swell guy. If you haven't met him in person, you're missing something, but also an amazing writer, amazingly sensitive writer in a field full of a lot of testosterone, and just a great storyteller. And so we'll be talking about his books, but especially Lightning Strike, which I just finished as well. He started writing the Cork O'Connor series with Iron Lake in 1996. I mean, I was 4 years old. 25 years later, we're celebrating the release of the 18th book, Lightning Strike, and it's a prequel. It's it's what happened before page 1 of Iron Lake. And I just want to start with, I'm going to ask you about the book itself, but one of the things that happens when you're a writer, if you're lucky and you have a good agent who makes a good contract, is you get to look at the cover before it's finalized. And you get to have some input into what exactly goes on the cover. And I just want you to look at this cover. And I'd like Kent to talk about, how did that cover come about? It's got a little boy on a bike. It's got a skeletal tree. It's got luminescent clouds, and it's murky. Let us into the backstory of the cover. What happened here?
Okay, but before I do that, there's one thing I want to say.
Yeah.
I just want to congratulate the Maynard Public Library on serving the community for 150 years. That's really remarkable. And I'm going to ask everybody out there who's watching to join me in a round of applause to everyone at the Maynard Public Library who's made that possible over all of these years, living and dead. Yeah, clearly you had input in what your covers look like long before I did. I mean, it's only been recently that that I've had a chance actually to weigh in on the covers in any significant way. But the cover that you see for Lightning Strike was proposed to us in almost the way it looks now, which is very unusual. Usually when we get the cover proposal, we have a lot of tweaking that we have to do. In this one, the bike rider was kind of floating in air. So we had them address that. We had them change the bicycle. It just didn't quite fit the Schwinn varsity that's in the story. That tree in the background, which is so kind of menacing, has always been there, and I've loved that, how it arcs over everything. The blue, we tweaked the blue just a little bit, but in terms of how it looks, that was essentially what was presented to us by the art department. And I got to tell you, I am so thrilled with the art people at Simon & Schuster, the division that publishes me, Atria Books. They have always just given me stunning book covers. But for the last 4 or 5, I've actually had a significant say in how the final cover turned out, and I really appreciate that. And
Well,
do you have that?
The tree is so important in the story,
And
and the little boy, so little relative to the tree, and then the power of nature. I mean, to me, it kind of, it just goes with the book,
I love everything you're reading into that cover, Hallie. I just like the fact that William Kent Krueger is huge.
Did you notice? He's twice as big as the title.
You've made it when suddenly your name is bigger than the title.
It's true. It's true. It's true. Oh, well, anyway, when you wrote Iron Lake, did you have any inkling that you would be writing this book so many years later, this story? Was it there in any shape or form?
Absolutely not. Like almost all of us, all of my colleagues who have written long-running series, with my first novel, Iron Lake, I was just trying to write a manuscript that was good enough somebody might actually want to publish it. But I have to admit that about 3/4 of the way through the writing of Iron Lake, I realized I was creating relationships that were so complex, I wasn't going to be able to wrap them up in a satisfactory way by the end of the novel. And I thought, where do I want all of the people here that I've created? Where do I want them to be in their lives eventually? And I thought, okay, this is the place, but it's going to take me a while to get there. I thought it's probably going to take me like 3 books, and it did. If you look at the first 3 books in the Cork O'Connor series, it's a story arc that begins with the potential dissolution of Cork's family, and at the end of the 3rd book, we bring them back to a resolution and a recommitment between Cork and his wife to their family and to each other. And with that one, I guess I knew I was off and running in terms of a real series, and I've never looked back. But 18 books, who would have imagined that? Or a prequel as the 18th book? My goodness.
Yeah, well, Well, we'll all be interested to see where you go from here. So I hope you have something, if not underway. I know you alternate these days between series books and standalones.
Yeah, it's really refreshing for me to do the standalones, but I have completed the manuscript for the next book in the Cork O'Connor series. It will be a novel called Fox Creek, and it will be out in August of next year. And I just got the suggestions for revisions from my editor, who is like the best editor in the entire universe. So I'll be working on those for a while, and then I return to work on the next standalone novel.
I'm looking to see who is your publisher?
Atria Books, a division of Simon & Schuster.
So who's the editor that you love?
Peter Borland. Peter
What is it?
Borland. Peter Borland.
Okay.
He's just a fantastic editor.
So what makes a fantastic editor as opposed to a not
A,
so
a non-fantastic editor? I don't know. For me, it's simply that Peter gets me. He respects my work. He understands how I go about what I do, and he's really able to help me do that better without being intrusive as an editor. Peter never makes demands. He never insists. He always makes really well-considered, graciously offered suggestions. And so it's a very collegial relationship. I trust his judgment tremendously. And the result is everything that I offer to Peter when I have made the revisions that he suggested make the book so much better.
Yeah, it's great to have an editor that you can hear.
Yeah, do you have an editor that you really rely on significantly?
I do, but my experience with editors is that they move around.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I had one for the last 6 books. Catherine Ninsel at HarperCollins, and I adore her. But they've asked her to start a new imprint, which is exciting. Women's fiction, and I'm afraid I'm not going with her, but whatever.
Oh, I'm sorry, Hallie. You know, I had 5 editors for my first 3 books, so I know what that feels like. Then I got a wonderful editor for 15 years. She left, and about 5 years ago, Peter came on. Peter became my editor. So I have had.
You were a known quantity, so he was probably able to say, I think I can work with this writer too. So
yeah, I don't know how it came about. I'm just happy it happened. Thank you, Lord.
Yeah. I want to ask you about water.
Yeah.
It's such an essential element in virtually every standalone, every series novel. What is your relationship to bodies of water that has created this? You know, did you have a dad that took you fishing? Where is this coming from? Or is it just having grown up in that part of the world?
My spirit creature is an otter. I have always believed that it's somewhere deep inside me is the spirit of an otter, because from my earliest memories, I was a water creature. I spent all my summers either in swimming pools or lakes or swimming holes, swimming in rivers. It was just a huge part of my growing up. So somehow my spirit is tied to water, but as a writer, I just love what water offers us in terms of metaphors, in terms of setting, in terms of atmosphere. So if you read my novel set in southern Minnesota, the Minnesota River, which is an actual river, plays a significant part. The Minnesota River Valley is just stunningly beautiful in an agrarian way. And so I rely on that river significantly to take a reader along through that valley. If you've read This Tender Land, it's important to the journey that the vagabonds, my 4 vagabonds in that story, the 4 orphans, are on. But if you go up to northern Minnesota, you can't write about northern Minnesota without talking about the water up there. If you think Paul Bunyan country, a lot of people who've never been here imagine what Paul Bunyan country will be like, tall pines, pristine lakes, fast, clear running water. It's really like that. That's not just a pipe dream. That's what northern Minnesota is. And so when I write about northern Minnesota for the Cork O'Connor series, water becomes a very important element in the story because fishing is huge, canoeing is huge. That's what draws a lot of the tourists up there. So many of the Native Americans, their land abuts large bodies of water. So water is important. And you know, as a storyteller, I just love all of the metaphors that water offer us in terms of the stories that we create, you know?
Well, there's purification and danger. I mean, what's cool about it is that it's a great, I hate to say this, plot device. It offers you all kinds of ways of escaping, drowning, cleansing. I mean, it's just a wonderful thing to have in a book.
You know, that strikes me as something a teacher of creative writing would say. See, you teach creative writing, don't you?
I do.
Yeah, I have heard wonderful reports about you as a teacher of creative writing. Well done, well done.
Well,
But
it's
those are
funny,
the kinds of things.
in a lot of my books, fire plays a role, and it's not because I've
Yeah.
experienced a lot, but it's because it terrifies me. And
Oh,
I wonder if
really?
you have that at all with water. I don't think so. It feels
No,
like
if you read my stories, water is always an element that you embrace and that somehow mothers you, befriends you, carries you, comforts you. That's water for me. Boy, but I can sure get why fire would be that way. You know, if you ask for me here in Minnesota, it's winter. It is the bitter winter that, in fact, if you're not careful, can kill you here. And so, in a lot of my novels, I use the winter storms as elements to create fear and suspense and complications.
well, I mean, the title of the book is light. I mean, lightning is a weather event. It's a scary thing too.
Yeah, and it's what for those of you who haven't read Lightning Strike is a place. If you have any familiarity at all with my Cork O'Connor series, you may know that every title in the series is a two-word place name: Iron Lake, Boundary Waters, Purgatory Ridge, etc. And Lightning Strike is a place, not a real place. I created it. But it is a place where a logging camp once existed in an area where the Ojibwe believe logging should never have taken place. And as a result of a lightning strike, it burned. And the remains of it then are important to this particular story.
I'm going to shift gears a little bit. I read in an interview with you once, you were asked about a favorite book, and you called out Stand By Me by Stephen King.
Yeah, it's not that's the movie that was made
movie.
from the novella. The novella is The Body.
Right.
And it's one of my favorite stories of male adolescence, the bonding that takes place when you're 12 or 13 years old, the kinds of friends you have at that age that you will never have again.
Yeah, I'd like you to talk a little more about that, because that's one of the things I loved about this book is the age that our hero is. I mean, for those of us who know 12 and 13-year-old boys, it's a tender age. It's a malleable, vulnerable, exciting age, because they're becoming themselves. And I was wondering, when you write that, do you have a little boy that age? Do you remember your own childhood? Where is that coming from?
You know, it's really easy for me to slip into the adolescent Cork O'Connor, the Cork O'Connor at 12 or 13 years old, because very recently I've done a couple of novels in which the narrators were 12 or 13-year-old boys. So I've been in that mindset for some time now. And I've said this before, I'll say it again. I'm a firm believer that men never mature much past the age of 12 or 13 years old. We're always stuck in our adolescence. So it was really easy for me to slip into Cork's mindset. And then in truth, Cork comes out, who Cork is at 12, comes out of a lot of who I was at 12 years of age. So I tapped my own childhood. I was a Boy Scout. Cork's a Boy Scout. I delivered newspapers. Cork delivered newspapers. My bicycle was my primary mode of transportation when I was that age. So it was really easy to give Cork a lot of the attributes that I possessed at 13 years of age. Of course, I never got involved in a murder investigation when I was, but I sure would have loved to have been involved in that when I was 12 or 13 years of age.
And you didn't have a dad who was a sheriff.
No, my dad was a high school English teacher. Not quite as exciting, but certainly helpful for me as a writer.
Yes, indeed. Wow, I want to follow that, but I want to ask another question. I have tried writing a book where the narrator was, a virtual me at 12 or 13 years old. And the difficulty with it is that it gets pigeonholed as a book for kids. Well, you don't write these books for kids. These are not kids' books. These are
Well,
books
I
for
hope that young adults will read them. I
but
wrote them in such a
mature
way.
young adults who are
Yeah,
reading.
I wrote them in such a way that I wanted a very broad audience, and I've had a number of teachers, in fact, contact me about this Tender Land and Ordinary Grace and indicate that they have included it in their
Oh,
curriculum,
that's nice.
upper middle grade, high school, and at the collegiate level as well. So really, that I wanted a very broad audience. Yeah, that was purposeful.
But I've noticed that one of the things that you do is that you write from the adult's perspective somewhat. In other words, we're not, well, of course you have, more than one. Well, anyway, did you struggle with that at all, or did it just was piece of cake?
Well, the dual narrative technique that you're talking about, I used both in Ordinary Grace and This Tender Land. And so it's a story that's actually being related by a much older individual. In Ordinary Grace, it's a man in his 50s. In This Tender Land, it's a man in his 80s. And they're remembering a time much earlier in their life. So you begin with the overarching adult perspective, but then you slide into the story being told essentially from the point of view and the voice of that very young narrator. And it's a device that I first discovered in To Kill a Mockingbird. It's what Harper Lee uses to tell her story, and I loved it in that. I thought it just contributed so much complexity and dimension and richness to the story that I thought I would give it a try in Ordinary Grace. And I so enjoyed the process that I decided when I wrote This Tender Land, I was going to use the same thing. Now, Lightning Strike is different in that you don't have that young narrative voice, first person narrative voice, but you do have two different perspectives. And the two different perspectives are really being offered by the two of the characters. You have Cork O'Connor at the age of 12, 13 years old, and you have his father, Liam O'Connor, who is a man well into his probably about 40 at this point in the story. So you see the story developing from both of their perspectives, because one of the things at the heart of the story for me was the question of truth. Is there such a thing as truth, or does truth depend upon the perspective from which you view an event? And so I knew that there were going to be these deaths, particularly the one at the beginning, that was going to be viewed differently depending upon the community that you were part of or the heritage that you have. So the death of Big John Manydeeds is viewed by the white population and by Cork O'Connor's father, who was sheriff and Irish, differently from the Ojibwe community. And they see that death representing and being caused by very different things.
So I had sent you a little snippet from your book that it seems like a good time to read just a couple of paragraphs, because you really hit the nail on the head in this one little section about truth. And when you're writing a mystery novel, you're always writing about a puzzle at some level and finding out what's the solution. And it's not always clear cut.
Okay, so
read that.
here's what Halle has asked me to read. After she left, and I'm talking about Cork O'Connor's mother here. After she left, Cork lay with the book open on his lap, but he wasn't reading. He was thinking about the missing girl, about the lurking spirit of Big John, and about his father. All evening, Cork had fumed over the way his father had treated him, as if he were just a kid, forbidding him from following the trail of crumbs. His anger had cooled some, and he was considering now what his mother had said, that there was probably a whole lot more to the truth than simply finding answers. But finding answers was the beginning, wasn't it? He put the book away, turned out his light, and closed his eyes, thinking that there were still answers to be found, and he would find them. But he would have to be careful to make sure his father didn't know he was looking.
There's so much going on in that one little passage, you know, and one of the just key things is his relationship with his dad, who he loves, admires, and is trying to emulate, and is getting himself in a lot of trouble doing it.
Well, this is often characterized in part as a coming of age novel, and it certainly is. And so we see Cork in his adolescence beginning to understand that he needs to be a different person from what his father is, from what his father expects him to be, from what his family and his community expect him to be. And he's trying to figure out who the hell that is. And that's something, I don't know, that's something all boys go through when they're dealing with their dads. I'm guessing that it's something women go through when they're dealing with their mothers, trying to figure out who we are separate from all of these other images that people are trying to shape us into. And so when that happens, conflict arises, and it's just exacerbated here by the death of Big John, many deeds, and the conflict then that it causes in the Ojibwe and white community. Liam O'Connor is 100% Irish. Cork is both Irish and Ojibwe, so he's mixed heritage. He can see both sides of the issue. And so he has an entirely different perspective than his father has. And he begins to realize that, you know, his father doesn't always see things necessarily in the best way. So Cork sets out to find his own way toward the truth.
I wonder if you could talk about one of the characters for a minute, just in reflecting on those differences, that because one of the things that this novel does so well is it really pokes at cultural differences and gender differences and age differences and family differences. It really looks at that. And the character of Dilsey was just one of my favorites in the book. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about her. What kind of research did you do to bring her to the page? She's just magnificent.
Well, she's the voice of the Ojibwe.
Yeah.
Grandma Dilsey, I have often made reference to across the course of the Cork O'Connor series because she was significant in helping shape Cork into the man he is, particularly in his understanding of the culture of that part of his heritage. Grandma Dilsey was a school teacher. Grandma Dilsey was among those who were taken away from their communities and their families when she was a girl and raised in a Native American boarding school run by very strict nuns. And she has no real happy memories of that time, but she got a good an education. And what she has realized in her life is that education is the way to help her community. So she's become a teacher on the Iron Lake reservation, has been a teacher all her adult life there. And she really is the voice for Cork, the voice giving Cork the true history of his people, which includes an enormous amount of deceit, an enormous amount of cruelty, dishonesty, lies, and she is the constant reminder, particularly to Liam, that the white people don't have all of the answers, and the truth for the white people is not the truth for her people. And so she says it because she's educated. She says it eruditely. She says it with powerful language, and sometimes she's a little abrasive in how she approaches Liam O'Connor. But she is a woman standing up powerfully for her people.
What kind of research did you do to find her? Is she based on someone or
Oh, she is very much like so many of the Ojibwe women that I know, who are just powerful voices for their people. They don't back down. They tell it like it is. They give you the facts, and there it is. You can accept that or not, but this is the way it is.
And can you just talk a little bit about, how you engaged and found these, people to talk to, and, was it hard to break down any barriers, or were people
Yeah,
just willing to share?
sure. At first, there was a good deal of, well, I would go as far as to say distrust, because when I began to approach members of the Ojibwe community and ask them questions, their response was, yeah, why the hell do you want to know this? And why should I tell you this? And sometimes when I was told things, they weren't necessarily the truth. But over the many years that I have been working with the Ojibwe people and forming relationships and friendships within the community, I have earned a level of trust that's important to me. And so I rely significantly on my friends in the Ojibwe community for their perspective, their insights, their perceptions, their suggestions of issues that might be important for me to explore in my work. Before I turn in a manuscript, as long as my deadline will allow, I always ask at least one, but usually two of my Ojibwe friends to read and vet the manuscript, so that I haven't said anything that's too stupid or even worse, offensive. So I work very, I have no native blood in me whatsoever, not a single drop. And so every time I sit down to write a story in the Cork O'Connor series, I'm painfully aware that I'm a white guy trespassing on a culture not my own. So I work very hard to try to get it right. At least from a white perspective. If you were to read an Ojibwe author, and there are so many fine ones out there, you would see a different perspective, because it is truly from the inside.
Yeah. So to shift gears a little bit, you once told the New York Times that if you didn't write a mystery, you might like to write a ghost story. And there is not a small amount of paranormal in this story. I mean, you don't, go whole hog ghost story, but boy, it's there. And I wondered can you just, I love it. I personally love a touch of it. So, but I also like,
there's just a touch of it, just a touch of it.
But you needed it. It makes it, it's pretty effective. Can you talk about that aspect of the book?
Sure. Have you ever spent time in the woods alone, Hallie? It's so easy to imagine that there are spirits alive in the woods that you are aware of, cannot see. Sometimes maybe you hear, but don't present themselves in the way that flesh and blood beings present themselves. And I have always believed in that. I've always believed that there's so much more to existence than we can see or hear or experience in the normal sensual way. And we feel it with our heart, really, I think. And the Ojibwe people have always been very connected to the aliveness of nature, and to all of the ways that nature expresses itself if you listen, if you open yourself to it. And so it was not a leap at all to create and in fact, that comes directly out of some of the Ojibwe beliefs. There is an Ojibwe belief about the afterlife, and that if, in fact, you don't take to the path of souls soon enough, you linger back behind, and people, particularly children, who encounter you can be snatched away. It's one of those scary beliefs. But when I came across it in my research, I thought, I'm going to use this. So this will be an interesting possibility to put forward. So I decided to build it into the story. And I, because I love suspense, and I love the air of mystery, and I love especially the danger that exists in things that you can't really see. I just, when I thought about it, I thought this is going to be fun. And in fact, it was, for me at any rate. I hope readers have a fun time with it.
Yeah, well, I did. I enjoyed it. They're very dramatic, those scenes that you wrote, and heart pounding, and And I like that you didn't resolve it.
Well, and at one point I point out that Liam O'Connor, who is Irish and it really experiences one of these things, has a completely logical explanation for it. And so, you know, there again, you have the perspective of what's really true.
Right, right, right. Okay, shifting gears again, you have said that writing Cork prepared you to write standalones. And now that you're deeper in, I'm wondering if writing the standalones is influencing how you're moving the series ahead with Cork.
Well, my agent insists that that's true. I guess I'm not aware of it as I'm writing. I simply write the stories as they come to me. But you can't help being influenced by the things that you observe in your writing that work quite well, and maybe those things that haven't worked so well. And so if I think you're always growing as an artist, right, Hallie? You're always trying to get better. And so you put aside those things that didn't work and you embrace those with a little more passion, those that do work. And so because I think the standalones worked so well, but one of the reasons the standalones work well is I had learned so much about storytelling as a result of the Cork O'Connor novels that I've written. How to create character, how to create suspense, how to hold readers in suspense, how to give them that satisfying payoff when you have created moments of suspense. All of that I brought into play in both Ordinary Grace and This Tender Land, and I learned that in writing the mysteries, you know?
Right, right. Well, that's the perfect segue into another question that I have, which is one of the fun things to do with your books is just to read the chapter endings and the chapter starts and then skip over everything and then just read so here's one. This is the end of chapter 43. Damn, Liam whispered. Then he looked up at Cork. I hope you never wear a badge. And for the reader, knowing that, you know, what I love about the way you do it is you don't comment on it. It's just hanging there. And the reader gets to load the meaning in. So I have a question. Do you look at chapter endings specifically as part of your writing process?
Don't you?
I absolutely do, yeah.
Yeah, I think every good writer does, because you're always wanting to hook the reader into reading that next chapter. You know, at 1 o'clock at night, when they're tempted to close the book, you want to give them something that says, okay, just 15 more minutes. And because you don't want to do it in a cliched way. You're always looking for unique ways of ending that chapter in a way that's going to get the reader just to say just one more chapter. Yeah.
Okay, so now I got to ask you. You were once asked, what's the book you couldn't finish? And your answer was The Da Vinci Code. Well, if ever there were a book where the chapter endings make it so it's hard to, okay, so what is it about that book? Because I actually agree with you. I skipped over the last 100 pages just to see how it ended. But it's not because the chapters aren't propulsive or hooked well to each other, but what is it that fails to engage you?
I found it an adequate thriller, and only that. And so I was looking for what made it such a huge phenomenon, and I couldn't find it. And I was 3/4 of the way through the book, and it had eluded me, and I wasn't engaged in the characters, all of whom I found to be two-dimensional. I wasn't engaged with the writing itself, which I found fairly pedestrian. And I honestly didn't care where it was going, and decided, okay, that's it. I gave you a chance. You didn't wow me. I'm done with it. So that was it, and that was me. Clearly it spoke to lots and lots. It is the best-selling piece of American fiction of all time. I don't know if you knew this, Hallie. It's the best-selling piece of American fiction of all time. But let me ask you this. Do you know what the Da Vinci Code replaced as the best-selling piece of American fiction of all time?
It's either the Bible.
No, that's first of all not American fiction,
Oh, okay, okay.
and there are a
No,
lot of
I
people that
think
argue
I
it's not
believe that
fiction.
book about that Clint Eastwood plays. No,
Nope.
what is it?
Would you maybe have guessed Gone with the Wind? To Kill a
No, I
Mockingbird?
wouldn't have. Is that the?
Huckleberry Finn? Well, it's none of those. The best-selling piece of American fiction of all time prior to the Da Vinci Code was The Valley of the Dolls by Jacqueline
Oh,
Suzanne.
wow. Well, that doesn't surprise me. Yeah,
Well, and see, who reads The Valley of the Dolls anymore?
yeah, yeah.
It was a phenomenon for whatever reason of its time. And that's how I view the Da Vinci Code. It was a phenomenon of its time. 10 years from now, 15 years from now, people, won't be reading the Da Vinci Code. It will be something of the past. But people are still going to be reading Gone with the Wind, and they're going to be reading Huckleberry Finn, and they're going to be reading To Kill a Mockingbird, because these are great pieces of literature.
And we hope lightning strike.
Well, I don't know. I'm not shooting for that, but hey, if it happens, that would be great.
Yeah. Well, it's been nice to see your work received. I mean, we are genre fiction writers, said with this, snootiness of people who write real books. And it's just a pleasure to see your work taken very seriously as literature. And I do think that you have scaled the heights in terms of being taken seriously, being rather than just, it's a whodunit. It's not ever just a
You know,
whodunit.
I, I'm often called a writer, or more specifically, maybe a mystery writer, but I have always thought of myself primarily as a storyteller.
Mm.
And rather than thinking of myself as a writer, I like thinking of myself as a storyteller because it takes a lot of weight off my shoulders. When you say he's a writer, there are expectations that come along with that. And I'm afraid those expectations would weigh too heavily on me. But if I say I'm just a storyteller, I'm just trying to tell you a good story, then I can do lots of things within that without, raising a lot of expectations that I might not be able to meet. My own expectations as well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think it also helps that we have such a great community of writers. We would all be on our way to BoucherCon right now in another year, but I have found that the community of crime fiction writers across the spectrum, whether we're talking, cozies or thrillers and everything in between, just a very, people offer you a hand, they give you a leg up. It's just a very welcoming.
A very generous community. When you look at all of the mayhem that we perpetrate in the pages of our books, it's so amazing that when anyone joins our community, they find us to be just really delightful people. That's certainly been my experience.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think we can turn it over to questions from the audience. Yeah, I find if Sally comes back, she might be able to pitch some of
There, Sally.
I'm back. Thank you so much for this conversation. We do have a couple questions. One is from Brittany. Hang on, I have to scroll. Asking about the response to your writing, Kent, from the Ojibwe community and from everyone in northern Minnesota.
Well, those are really two different questions because everyone in northern Minnesota is not Ojibwe.
Sure.
In northern Minnesota is a very large part of it is what we call the Iron Range, the range. And I'm always pleased when I get a note from a ranger who tells me that I've done a good job, that I've depicted the area of their homeland well, in their opinion. And I am equally pleased when I get a note from a native reader telling me how much they appreciate how I have dealt with the native culture. I get those periodically, and I appreciate that too. I have not yet received a note from a native reader telling me that they really object to what I do. Generally speaking, they have been very positive in their response to my work so far. I got an email a while ago that went something like this. Dear Mr. Krueger, I am the tribal librarian for the Lance Reservation, which is on the UP of Michigan. She said, when any of our tribal members come into the library and they're not sure what they want to read, I will often recommend your books because for a white guy, you do a pretty good job.
That's great.
Great.
There's a
That's,
question.
you put that on a sweater, you know.
I like that.
There's a question from Mary. What was your favorite book when you were 12 or 13?
Do you know, can I tell a library story?
Sure.
It's a little bit long, but I'll try to truncate it here a little bit. When I was 12 years old, that was the summer between my 6th and 7th grade year. I was a Boy Scout, and that was the year I decided I was going to get my Reading Merit Badge. One of the requirements for the Reading Merit Badge was that you had to spend some time volunteering at your local library. I was working in a library. I was living in a little town in Ohio at that point, so I went to the library and I made arrangements. And when the time came, I showed up to do my duty. Now, this was long before they had computerized check-in and check-out. Do you remember that little envelope thing that used to be glued inside the back cover of every book and it had the slip inside? Well, what they did was they put me to work date stamping the returned books. So they gave me this black ink pad and a changeable rubber date stamp. And so for the first hour I was there, it was sort of ka-chunk, 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 ka-chunk. And after an hour of that, the librarian proceeded to walk my way and ask me a very librarian-esque question. She said, Kent, what do you like to read? Well, the honest to God truth was I like to read comic books, but I didn't want to tell her that. So I briefly considered lying, but there was that whole a scout is trustworthy thing going on. So I told her the truth, and without batting an eye, she said to me, have you ever read The Count of Monte Cristo? I walked out of the library that day with that great Dumas classic under my arm, and I was hooked. I loved The Count of Monte Cristo. And that librarian turned me on to H.G. Wells and Jules Verne and Arthur Conan Doyle and Jack London and Robert Louis Stevenson, all these guys who wrote these great stories that were perfect for capturing a boy's heart. But it began with The Count of Monte Cristo.
So that's a great story. And I think we all owe a lot to our childhood librarians.
Hear, hear.
There's a question from Jean. Now that some readers will begin the Cork O'Connor series with Lightning Strike, and some might begin it with the earlier parts of the series, Iron Lake, what do you think about that? And how do you think those readers' experiences might differ?
You know, it can be a really daunting thing standing before a series that is as deep as mine, 18 books, and it might be really off-putting to a reader. Where the hell do I begin? Whenever I used to get the question, where do I begin with your series? It would be, I recommend you start with Iron Lake, because the 17 books in the series at that point spanned 15 years in the lives of the characters involved, so they all age and change, and the relationships are fluctuating. So it's a much richer experience if you begin for the first and read them in order. But now with Lightning Strike as a prequel, that's really where I'm telling readers to begin, because you don't need to know anything at all about the series in order to appreciate this story. And it will give you a really good introduction to the characters that you might meet along the way, the kinds of elements that will comprise a typical story in my series, and who I am as a storyteller. So I think it's a really great place to begin. And then if you enjoy Lightning Strike, then you start with Iron Lake and work your way through the series.
It sounds good. Let's see. There was a question about, hang on. Oh, this is kind of fun from Wendy. If we've been inspired by your books to visit Minnesota, what is one special place you would not want us to miss?
The North Shore of Minnesota. The North Shore of Minnesota. Minnesota, as it heads north, curves dramatically east before it connects with Canada, and it follows the shoreline of Lake Superior. And the North Shore of Lake Superior is very similar to the North Shore of, I would say, Maine. Very rocky, wave lashed. We have a beautiful lighthouse up there that is it adorns so many calendars across the country. It is just stunningly beautiful. And to experience Superior, Hallie and I talked about water and its importance. If you stand on the shore of Lake Superior, you can feel the great spirit in that lake, and you understand why the Ojibwe revere it. It is a sacred place.
Well, I think we'll all be booking tickets soon. I'm curious about what prompted you to write Ordinary Grace, and then This Tender Land as well. With a successful series, did you just want to explore different topics, or did you have this story brewing and it just didn't fit, or how did those come about?
It was sort of all of those elements together. I'm on a spiritual journey. I think we all are, whether we embrace that or not. And if you were to look at my Cork O'Connor series, read a number of those stories, you would find that the spiritual journey is very often an undercurrent in the stories. It's something that comes very naturally for Cork O'Connor because he's a man with a foot in two different spiritual traditions, his white Catholicism, his Irish Catholic, and his Ojibwe spirituality. So very often he's trying to figure out where his unique spiritual path lies. And that's been an issue for me my whole life. But about 12 years ago, then a story that came to me that I thought would allow me to explore more deeply the importance of the spiritual journey. And that story was Ordinary Grace. I got to be honest with you, when I proposed the project to my publisher, they didn't want it. So I wrote Ordinary Grace across 3 years without a contract. But it was a story that compelled me, so I knew I had to write it. And I didn't know if readers were going to follow me to a place that didn't have Cork O'Connor in it, but it's turned out to be all right. We sold more than 1 million copies so far, so it's done all right.
Not bad.
And then that gave me the encouragement to write a book like This Tender Land as well, which if you read This Tender Land, you're going to see that the spiritual journey is a significant part of that story as well.
That's true. So I've heard stories about the book that came between those two. I'm just so curious about the book that you wrote and didn't want to have published. Are you willing to talk about that, or is that?
Sure.
Okay.
And it was never a book. It was a manuscript because I asked for it not to become a book. Yeah, so Ordinary Grace, even though my publisher had told me they didn't want it, when I finished the manuscript, I sent it to my editor at Simon & Schuster. She fell in love with it. And she said, of course, we're going to publish it. And they did. And it's had just this really remarkable reception from critics and readers alike. It won tons of awards when it came out. It's been translated into more than 24 foreign languages. And as I said, so far, it's sold more than 1 million copies. And when my publisher saw how well that book was doing, boy, did they want another book just like it. So I signed a contract for a companion novel to Ordinary Grace. They paid me a shitload of money, and I spent the next 2 years writing what I believed would be the companion novel for Ordinary Grace. That manuscript was contractually due to my publisher 6 years ago. 2 months before that contractual deadline, I set up a meeting in Chicago to talk to my agent about revisions to the piece because there were problems with it. I knew it, she knew it. 2 days before we got together, I sent her a note saying, when we meet, I don't want to talk about how we revise this piece. I want to talk about how we keep it from being published. Because it wasn't the story I'd imagined it would be. I had no idea how to make it that story. And frankly, my heart wasn't in it. My publisher actually turned out to be pretty understanding. They said, fine, you don't have to give us this manuscript, but you still owe us a companion novel. So here's what was going on. The expectations for that follow-up novel were enormous. And the whole time I was trying to write this story, I just felt crushed by the weight of all those expectations. And the truth is, when I was writing the piece, what I was doing was trying to meet everybody else's expectations instead of writing the story that spoke to me from my heart. But as soon as all that weight got lifted off my shoulders and I felt free again, I saw so clearly the story I should have been writing, the story that did speak to me from my heart. And that story became This Tender Land.
I don't think anyone who reads This Tender Land will ever complain. It's a beautiful book. Mary has a question about the harmonica in this tender land, and she wants to know if you play.
I do not play the harmonica. But for those of you who have read This Tender Land, my narrator, Odie O'Banion, I knew was going to play a number of important roles in the story. He would tell the story for me. So through him, I could say things about life that I've come to believe in profoundly. And he was going to be the guy who was going to keep the vagabond spirits up when things got pretty dark. And I knew he'd do it in two ways. Odie is a storyteller, as I'm a storyteller, so he would tell them stories. But when I thought about how do you keep someone's spirits up, it just seemed natural that it would be music. Music is so elemental to who we are as human beings. You know, we fall in love to music, we get married to music, we're buried to music, we march away to war to music. What would a movie be without a musical score, right? So I thought, okay, Odie's going to use music. And then when I thought, okay, if he's a musician, what reasonably can he take with him on a journey like this? Well, it was a no-brainer, a harmonica. Although I don't play the harmonica, I have always admired those who do. And so Odie plays a harmonica, and it becomes a way for him along the course of the journey to connect with many people along the way. Both the harmonica and music are ways he connects.
I love that you couldn't make it a cello.
You know, they could have canoed the cello down the river.
But that's the funny thing about writing a story is every time you come up, like, what kind of car does he have? Well, you know, where does it need to go? And where does it need to be invisible? And every little decision has to work with all of the elements of the plot.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And that's where the art of storytelling comes into play. You begin to see all of the threads and how do I weave them all together? Right. Hey, can I ask Hallie a question? Is this okay for me to do?
Yeah, absolutely.
Careful what you wish for. I see behind you. What do you work on now? What can we look for in the future?
Well, I'm not talking about it.
Oh, not even a little nibble?
Well, no. You know,
okay,
I like to write stories that have generations of women. And so the story that I'm working on has that. It has a young woman like one of my daughters, an older woman like me, and a still older woman in her 90s. And they're living in Brooklyn, where I've never said a book, but my kids live there.
Okay. Research.
Yeah, but you know, it's a story that I've had noodling around in my head. It's the very first manuscript, good distinction you drew earlier, I ever wrote and did not publish. It's got elements of that. And I'm sure you find the same thing that I always say, it's all compost, you know, even
absolutely
if it stinks, it's compost. Don't throw it away. You'll find a use for it one day.
Oh, absolutely. In both Ordinary Grace and This Tender Land, I mined earlier attempts at other stories and took bits and pieces out and plopped them in because this was where they worked.
Right. Yeah, I'm like that too.
Yeah. Okay, I won't press you anymore because I understand about not wanting to diffuse the energy of a work. I get that.
Well, it's not really that. It's that I really am still figuring it out.
Okay. Okay.
So this is a good time for Dottie's question. She's asking Hallie a little bit about, tell people a little bit about Careful What You Wish For.
Okay.
And then I have a question for both of you.
Oh my goodness. Careful What You Wish For. It's the opening line is, Emily Harlow was not convinced that her sock drawer sparked joy. So it's a very different kind of book than Kent's book. It's about a woman who's a professional organizer, and she's married to a man who cannot pass a yard sale without stopping. So their marriage is fraught. It's all about what speaks to your heart. What do you want to keep? And if it's your husband, can you fold him, or is he unfoldable? You know. So it's a little bit tongue in cheek. But it has a pretty strong mystery in it, and it has all of the things that my husband has collected at yard sales in it, but not my husband, who's a sweetheart, and I would never write about him. The guy in the book is not somebody you'd want to be married to. So
he does
that's my
to us.
book. It's what you call domestic suspense. It's fun.
So here's a question from Wendy that I think applies to both of you. Can you tell us a bit about your writing process? How do you know when it's time to start new work? And do you have any rituals that sustain you as a writer?
Go ahead, Kent.
Yeah, like most of my colleagues, I'm very disciplined in my approach to writing, and I do have rituals. So for the last 40 years, my alarm has gone off at about 5:45 in the morning. I've gotten myself up and dressed, and I've gone to a coffee shop where I spend the first 2 to 3 hours of every morning, 7 days a week writing. And that's also not just a part of the discipline, it's a part of the ritual, because traveling from home to the coffee shop, I'm preparing myself to sit down at the office and get my work done. And when I sit down with a cup of coffee and bend to the work, it's just how I do it. I can't write without coffee. And although the pandemic has forced me to stay home as opposed to the coffee shop, I still get up at 5:45 in the morning and spend the first 2 or 3 hours writing with a cup of coffee beside me. So yeah, that's how I do it. You, Hallie?
No, I stay home. I spent the first 20 years of my adult life having a regular job because I had kids at home. And it wasn't until this room that I'm in, which used to be the playroom, got vacated by my daughters, and I could turn it into an office, that I started to think about writing fiction. So I was 40 before I put a single made up word on the page. I was writing before, but writing nonfiction that people paid me to write. And so I'm like you, I like to work in the morning. That's my best time, is from 7 until 11. And if I can get into the office and working, that's perfect. I can edit anything in the afternoon, and I love editing. I find first draft really hard. I always say the blank page, filling it, it's like pushing wood through a meat grinder. It's really tough and painful. But then when I have something, even if it's terrible, I can do something with it.
Mhm.
And I always say, today's crap is tomorrow's compost, and you can really rework it once you've got something down there. I do outline. I don't know if you outline, but my outline gets more and more specific as I write more. So I, in the beginning, just have the vaguest idea of where I'm going, and then I flesh out the outline as I'm going, because one of the hard things is when you finish a book, you've got 350, 400 pages of stuff. And how do you know what you wrote? You can't keep rereading it and but I do, rereading it and rereading it.
Yeah.
So I like to keep an ongoing outline that just becomes more and more specific as I write the book. So my outline might end up being 20 pages long for a 350-page manuscript. And it allows me to then look at the structure of the story without all the words, just the structure. Have I got this rising and then falling and then rising? And is there enough tension? Is there enough surprises? Is it working from a dramatic point of view?
Yeah.
So that's when my process is working, that's how it works.
Okay, I'm going to put out a question to the audience. Anyone from a book group? Is there anyone from a book group who read This Tender Land who has a question specifically about that? Feel free to put it in the chat. And until one comes up, I want to thank you both for such a wonderful evening. I can't imagine a better way to celebrate our anniversaries, our 3 anniversaries this year. And one small silver lining of the pandemic is that we get to spend time with people far away over Zoom. So thank you so much, Kent, for joining us.
Oh, I so appreciate the opportunity to be in conversation with Hallie. It's been a very long time since we've had a chance to talk. So thank you, Maynard Public Library, for making this possible.
And I'll second that and say next time I want to be there in person though, please. Okay.
That's
Could you do something about this epidemic?
we'll work on it. So we are having a few questions and comments. Wendy, who is the leader of our Book Mill discussion group, is saying it's one of the few books we've read at Book Mill that was loved by all. So
Oh, good.
that's fantastic. And Mary is asking, how did you pick out the names of your characters in This Tender Land?
Oh, they just came to me. Sometimes, and maybe Hallie can weigh in on this, that the best names come with the character. When the character comes into your head, they come with a name, and it's there, and it's right. But all the characters don't come to you that way. All the names don't come to you that way. So sometimes you struggle with names. You try different names on them, and they just Odie was always Odie because he was Odysseus, and I wasn't quite sure what else he was going to be, but for some reason it just seemed the right thing to make him Irish. And so I sought out a good Irish name, and just Odie O'Banion. I just liked the way that flowed off my tongue. So he was Odie O'Banion. Mose was Mose pretty much from the beginning. Emmy was pretty much the same from the beginning. I searched around for Albert, the older brother's name. Mrs. Brickman, I worked on the name for Brickman. Some of the names, One-Eyed Jack, I knew One-Eyed Jack was going to be who he was right from the get-go because of the part he plays. Sister Eve, it worked a little bit to come up with Sister Eve. So sometimes you work with the names, sometimes they come to you. I don't know, Hallie, sometimes I walk through, I got to admit this, cemeteries looking for interesting names. I've pulled names off exit signs on the interstate. They come from everywhere. Where do you get your names?
Well, one of the places that I like to look is, every character has a frame of reference, so someone who's 40 today grew up, 20 years ago and was born 40 years ago. Well, what were the names that people were giving people then? I mean, if you name someone Carol or Susan or Nancy, I know she's my age. So part of the trick is finding names that will fit. But then once you've locked one name in, it limits the other names.
Yeah.
Yeah, because otherwise, if you've got a Nancy, you don't want a Nina.
Right.
Because the reader will forget who's who and they'll get completely confused. You want names that are, and what I like about the names that you had is each of those is very distinct. You're not going to mix them up. And when I'm writing, sometimes I'll mix the names of my own characters up and then I know I need to change them. Yeah,
this is the nitty gritty of being a writer. When you go through your story and you go, oh, two characters who have similar names, got to change one of those, that kind of a thing.
And I try never to give a character a single syllable name that might be inside another word, because then when you do search and replace, you get a complete mess in your manuscript.
These are the things they don't.
No Pats.
These are the things they don't teach you in creative writing classes.
That's great. Sorry, I lost the question. Oh, here we go. Dottie is in a book group that is talking about This Tender Land tomorrow. And what is the one thing you would like a reader to take from it?
Hope.
Oof.
All about hope. If you take anything from it, it's, as long as you hold to hope, you're going to get home in the end. It's only when we abandon hope that we get lost.
And I think that might be a good place to stop.
Okay.
So again, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful evening, and like I said, a wonderful celebration for our anniversaries. And we were so pleased to have you both with us. Thank you and have a good night.
Thanks
Thank you.
everyone for joining us.